So the wedding is postponed, my mother declared, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. I blinked, momentarily stunned, unable to process what I had just heard. Just a few moments ago, I was entirely focused on my upcoming wedding rehearsal dinner, a day that was supposed to mark the beginning of a new chapter in my life. Yet here I was standing in front of friends and family, trying to comprehend the weight of her words. She continued, seemingly unfazed by the gasps and murmurs spreading through the room. Jessica's engagement party needs more preparation, and we simply can't do both at once. Her gaze settled on me, and I could almost feel the indifference in her eyes. Jessica, my younger sister, beamed from where she sat, her cheeks flushed with the thrill of whatever had just transpired in her favor. My parents had always had a soft spot for her, the baby of the family, so to speak. But this, postponing my wedding for an engagement party, it was a new low even for them. Around us, the room buzzed with a mix of shock and awkward silence. My friends exchanged uneasy glances, not quite sure where to look, while family members whispered to each other, their voices carrying a blend of disbelief and intrigue. I felt my heart sink as embarrassment painted my cheeks a burning red. Here I was, humiliated in front of the very people who had gathered to celebrate my impending marriage. Their expressions ranged from sympathetic to outright stunned, but nobody seemed to know what to say. What could they say? I took a deep breath, forcing a calm expression onto my face even as my insides churned. It wasn't the time or place for a confrontation. Arguing would only escalate the spectacle my mother was so keen on creating. Instead, I nodded slowly, as if I understood and agreed with her decision. Inside, however, a storm was brewing, a storm that would eventually turn the tide in my favor. As the evening wore on, I retreated into the roles expected of me, the polite hostess and the composed bride-to-be. I smiled when needed, responded to questions about the wedding that now seemed irrelevant, and tried to ignore the talk of my sister's engagement festivity that was supposedly more critical than my own wedding day. Throughout dinner, Jessica seemed blissfully unaware or perhaps intentionally ignorant of the discomfort swirling around her. She was all smiles, basking in the attention that should have belonged to me today. I watched her pour on the charm, spinning tales about her fiancé and the grand plans she had for their future, all while my own plans were being unceremoniously shelved. By the time the evening drew to a close, I was exhausted both physically and emotionally. As I stood by the door, bidding farewell to the last of our guests, I struggled to keep my voice steady. This was only the beginning, I reminded myself. There were decisions to be made and a path to be carved, one that ensured I would reclaim what was rightfully mine. Looking out into the night sky, I could feel the resolve hardening within me. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The next evening, I found myself standing in front of a grand ballroom, my sister's engagement party in full swing. I felt like an outsider in a sea of familiar faces. The lighting was warm and flattering, casting a golden hue over the room and enhancing the air of celebration. Jessica flitted from group to group, her laughter ringing out above the chatter, reveling in what should have been my moment. I couldn't help but admire her charisma, even as my resentment simmered just beneath the surface. As the evening unfolded, I watched her charm our relatives and her new in-laws. The gentle clinking of glasses, congratulatory toasts, and soft music filled the room. I had to remind myself to keep smiling, to appear supportive, even as my mind churned with thoughts of my own wedding, its dates, and the plans that had been so carelessly discarded. I couldn't help but feel like an actor in someone else's play, where I had somehow become the supporting character instead of the lead. Throughout the night, I found myself listening more than talking, absorbing the varying conversations around me. At one point, I wandered closer to a circle of guests surrounding my parents, their voices low and intimate, an unintended eavesdropper to words not meant for my ears. Their voices were hushed, confident, as if discussing their latest investment rather than the wreckage of my plans. "Well, it's a shame about the cancellation." My father's voice floated over, tinged with that familiar practicality. But at least the deposit wasn't a complete waste. My mother chuckled softly, a sound that grated on my nerves. True, it's not every day you get such a venue for free. Makes for a good story, wouldn't you say? The implication hung in the air, my wedding venue, non-refundable as it was, being seen as a convenient stepping stone for Jessica's engagement celebration. My resolve solidified then, the injustice of it all sharpening my focus. Their disregard for my happiness, for the plans I had poured my heart into, was maddening. I stood there, rooted to the spot, as one of the guests asked, "But what about the actual wedding? Surely plans were in place for that." "Oh, it'll all work out," my mother replied with a wave of her hand. Jessica's big day required more attention right now. No hint of remorse, no recognition of the chaos they had caused. It was as if my own wedding was just a footnote to their grander plans. My heart ached with anger, yet my face betrayed nothing as I nodded in agreement when a well-wisher complimented Jessica's engagement dress. I had become adept at wearing masks around my family, a necessary skill developed over years of being the lesser-favored child. Yet some part of me felt liberated. Their words, spoken so casually and so carelessly in my presence, were the galvanization I needed. I spent the rest of the evening blending into the background, speaking only when spoken to, my thoughts consumed with potential paths forward. I would handle this with the same quiet determination that had served me well in the past. The night, with all its ostentatious displays of wealth and affection, seemed muted against the clarity of my purpose. As the engagement party wound down, I lingered near the exit, watching as the few remaining guests gathered themselves to leave. Jessica was radiant, waving each person off with a bright smile and a grateful hug. I approached her, offering a warm embrace, whispering words of congratulations that concealed my resolve beneath their sincere veneer. She thanked me, her gratitude untainted by any awareness of the situation she and our parents had created. Watching her walk away, her figure disappearing into the night, I turned to face my own path. The resolve that had taken root during our rehearsal dinner had grown stronger. I wouldn't allow myself to be swept aside. My wedding day would come, and it would be on my terms. Their betrayal was the catalyst I needed. The wind was cold on my face as I stepped outside, but I welcomed it, letting it cleanse the remnants of the evening's bitterness from my mind. It was done. I had witnessed their callousness firsthand, and now I had the fuel I needed to set my plans in motion. The future was uncertain, but one thing was crystal clear. I would not let this stand. Not anymore. As I walked to my car, I could already feel the storm within me coalescing, shaping itself into a resolve as immovable as the mountains. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The morning light was thin and pale as I drove to the venue, my hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than usual. The thought that my parents could so easily dismiss my wedding plans was both infuriating and saddening. I parked and walked to the entrance, the old brick facade of the building looming above me. This place was supposed to be the setting for my special day, a day I dreamed about since I was a little girl. Inside, the air was cool and fragrant with faint notes of lilies and roses. I approached the front desk where a kind-faced woman greeted me with a polite smile. "Good morning," she said, her voice warm and welcoming. "How can I help you today?" I took a deep breath, keeping my tone as I explained, "I'm here to confirm the reservation for my wedding. I'm worried there may have been an error." The woman's fingers tapped rhythmically on the keyboard as she pulled up the reservation details, her brows furrowed slightly, and I felt my heart twist with anxiety. "It seems," she began, "that the reservation has been canceled. It was marked as canceled by your family." For a moment, I was silent, processing her words. The image of my parents casually dismissing my plans without so much as a conversation flickered in my mind. It was as if they'd stolen something invaluable from me and discarded it carelessly. "I see," I said, my voice refusing to let my emotions slip through. "Thank you for letting me know." The woman's expression was apologetic, but there was little she could do without causing more waves. I nodded to her. "If you could email me the cancellation details, I'd appreciate it." As I walked out, the reality of what my parents had done settled heavily around me. They had made a decision on my behalf, considering it easier to manage my wedding than defer Jessica's engagement celebrations, as if my plans didn't carry the same weight. Outside, the sun shone bright, a stark contrast to the shadows of disappointment and betrayal I felt. The path forward seemed daunting, but I was resolute. I couldn't allow this betrayal to define my future. There was a calmness in my resolve, a determined stillness that promised action. Driving back, my thoughts were a whirl of potential strategies and options. But there was one thing I knew for sure. I needed evidence. Evidence that would illustrate the sheer audacity of their actions. It was time to take control and ensure that, one way or another, my wedding would proceed as originally planned. My parents had made their choice without regard for the consequences, and now, quietly and strategically, I would make mine. The foundation of their actions had begun to crack, and underneath it, my resolve was unbreakable. I felt the winds of change gathering around me, whispering promises of justice and redemption. The next day, I sat across from a lawyer, a friend of a friend who generously agreed to see me on short notice. Her office was warm and inviting, filled with stacks of neatly organized files, a stark contrast to the chaos I felt had taken root in my life. Her name was Julia, and she exuded a confidence that I found both reassuring and necessary. I explained my situation, omitting none of the painful details. Julia listened intently, nodding occasionally. Her eyes narrowed as the tale unfolded, the gravity of my predicament seemingly taking shape in her mind. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, her hands clasped together. "You did the right thing by coming here," she said. "Now, let's talk about your rights." We discussed everything from the venue cancellation policies to the email correspondence I had started collecting. Julia explained that if my parents had acted without my consent, I could contest their actions, especially given the financial and emotional implications. Her voice was a steady beacon as she outlined the steps I could take, each word crafted a path forward. I left her office with a sense of purpose, clutching a folder filled with notes and a renewed. My next move was to gather concrete evidence. Julia had advised me to be thorough, documenting every instance of interference, every misleading promise, and every unwarranted decision. I felt a calm resolve as I tackled this task, knowing that a clear picture of my parents' betrayal would only strengthen my position. Back home, I sat at my desk, surrounded by old photographs, invitations, and emails that now told a story of manipulation. I opened my laptop and began the meticulous process of sifting through months of correspondence. The emails were a painful reminder of the trust that had been so thoughtlessly discarded. In one email, my mother had assured me, "Don't worry, sweetie, we'll handle everything." Another, from my father, noted a change I hadn't agreed to, phrased as though it was for my benefit. I highlighted these exchanges, compiling them into a document that grew in weight and meaning with each added line. The more I uncovered, the more the hurt calcified into something stronger, something unyielding. What had once been disbelief was now an unwavering promise to myself to not let their betrayal go unanswered. As evening drew near, I thought about my sister, Jessica, who surely had no idea of the machinations set around her or the chaos brewing beneath our family's surface. I held no ill will towards her. In many ways, she was as much a pawn as I had been. My focus remained on those who orchestrated the mess. I finally received the email from the venue detailing the cancellation. The words struck like arrows, each line a reminder of the lengths my parents had gone to override my wishes. The document was clinical, listing dates and the reasons my parents saw fit to give, none of which included seeking my approval. With evidence in hand, I felt an odd. Now, it wasn't just a story of betrayal, it was a documented series of events, a narrative that could be laid bare for anyone who dared question my motives or my rights. My plan was falling into place with methodical precision, each step a testament to my resolve and restraint. I spent the next week quietly accumulating more evidence, visiting the venue on occasion to confirm details with the staff. Each visit reaffirmed my commitment to reclaim what had been wrongfully taken. The conversations were short, the staff sympathetic but professional, offering all the information they could within their bounds. When I left the venue on my final visit, the sun had begun its descent. Its warm glow cast long shadows on the ground, a reminder that time was moving on, and so was I. My parents had never once suspected I was building a case, still immersed in preparations for Jessica's engagement party, presumptive in their belief that I would acquiesce to their plans. But I was no longer the daughter who accepted their decisions without question. Every document I collected, every piece of correspondence, each conversation at the venue was toward justice, toward reclaiming my wedding day. With the pieces falling into place, I knew the time would come when I'd introduce my parents to the full weight of my resolve. Until then, I continued in my quiet determination, calm but not without purpose, patient but not passive. I had made peace with the path I was on. The winds of change, felt only as a whisper before, were now a steady breeze pushing me forward. My wedding, like my sense of self, was not theirs to control or define. It was mine to claim, and soon enough, they would learn that I was no longer the person they could quietly overwrite. A few weeks later, I decided it was time to face the venue owner directly. Armed with the evidence I'd meticulously gathered, I felt a sense of calm determination, knowing I was taking a vital step toward reclaiming what was rightfully mine. The venue, a picturesque estate nestled at the edge of town, held bittersweet memories. It was supposed to be where my new life began, surrounded by friends and family. As I approached, I recalled the countless times I'd imagined my wedding day here, the smiles and laughter echoing through the grand hall. The owner, a kind-hearted woman named Eleanor, greeted me with a warm smile. We'd met once before when I initially booked the venue. Her hospitality was both reassuring and unnerving, given the circumstances. I hoped she would understand and support my bid to correct the wrongs I had endured. "Hello, dear, how can I help you today?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. "Eleanor, I need to discuss the booking for my wedding. There have been some developments." Her expression shifted to one of concern, and she invited me to sit with her in her office, a cozy room filled with mementos of past weddings and events. As I laid out the evidence, the emails, the cancellation policy, and the communications I had documented, I watched her face closely, hoping for a flicker of understanding. Now serious. I had no idea this was happening. I'm so sorry for what you've been through. Thank you, Eleanor. I just want to ensure my wedding goes ahead as planned. It's been a difficult time. She nodded, sifting through the documents with a furrowed brow. It's clear your parents acted without your consent. You have every right to your original date. Her support was a relief, but this was only the first hurdle. We discussed logistics, and I learned that while my original date was still open, securing a new date for Jessica's engagement party would be a challenge. Eleanor promised to do her best to accommodate both events without disrupting either. It took a few days for Eleanor to shuffle the arrangements discreetly, ensuring that no one in the family suspected a thing. She was as resourceful as she was empathetic. I believe I've managed to sort everything out, she told me during our next meeting. Your sister will have her party, and you'll have your wedding. A silent wave of gratitude washed over me. Thank you, Eleanor. You've been incredibly kind. The arrangements now solidified, I felt a newfound sense of reassurance. I had managed to preserve the integrity of my wedding day without resorting to open confrontation with my family, maintaining my composure even as my plans quietly took shape. In the coming weeks, I kept up the facade of cooperation with my parents and sister, biding my time and allowing them to assume their plans were proceeding as desired. I continued to assist Jessica with her engagement preparations, my outward warmth masking a focused determination to reclaim my own joy. As I left the venue for what I hoped would be the last time before my wedding, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a soft glow over the estate. It felt like a promise of things to come, a gentle reminder that my resolve was leading me toward a future I had chosen for myself. I knew the coming days would test my patience further, but I was ready to face whatever challenges arose. The pieces were in place, and I had safeguarded my path forward, ensuring that my wedding day would be all I had hoped for and more. I walked away, my heart light and unburdened, knowing that soon my family would realize their plans were not as secure as they'd believed. Their surprise would be dealt with decisively, but for now, I carried on with quiet dignity, aware that justice was finally within reach. The winds of change had become a gale, and I stood firm, ready to reclaim what was mine. Dinner at my parents' house was always a formal affair, complete with the best tableware and a menu catered to impress. That night, the air carried an undercurrent of expectation, subtly hinted in my mother's meticulously arranged centerpiece and my father's crisp new button-up shirt. As I took my seat across from Jessica, I couldn't help but notice the satisfaction that colored her every word, weaving effortlessly into stories of florists and caterers. Just as my resolve was settling into familiar calm, my mother cleared her throat with an air. Now that Jessica's engagement party is coming together nicely, she began, we need your help with the wedding planning. It's a big event, and we need everyone on board. She turned her gaze directly toward me, expecting compliance. My heart tightened momentarily in my chest, but I stayed composed, letting the request hang in the air between us. Jessica gave an almost imperceptible nod, as if she believed I should be grateful for this chance to contribute to her big day. It was clear they expected me to fall in line, without question. I picked up my glass and took a measured sip, letting the moment stretch until it threatened to snap. Of course, I replied, keeping my voice steady. I'm happy to help in any way I can. Beneath my words lay the unspoken truth, an undercurrent they were unaware of. The real planning had already been done, and the dates delicately shuffled by Eleanor meant my timeline was set. I watched as my parents, reassured by my apparent cooperation, continued their discussion about color schemes and bridal party duties. Jessica beamed at our parents, her excitement infectious. I think with a little more time, everything will be perfect, she mused, her eyes flicking back to me as if seeking approval. I offered a smile, allowing her to believe I admired her vision when all I could feel was the detachment of my own determination. As dinner wore on, the conversation settled into the stories of family recollections, holidays past, and shared laughter that now felt tinged with irony. They spoke of unity and support, of the importance of family bonds, completely unaware of the quiet defiance simmering beneath my composed exterior. By the time dessert came around, I had perfected the art of nodding and agreeing at the right moments, projecting a facade that concealed the truth of my actions. I glanced at the clock, noting the time as if marking the days until the revelation that would change everything. My father turned to me once more, his tone shifting to that of authority. We'll also need you to take on some of the logistical arrangements, he instructed, as if doling out chores to a child. With your experience, it'll be seamless. The corners of my mouth lifted slightly in a semblance of agreement, while inside I held on to the vision of my own perfectly planned day. I understand, I replied, ensuring my voice betrayed none of the inner conflict. I'll see what I can do. As the evening drew to a close, I stood to leave, holding on to the quiet victory of knowing I was a step closer to restoring what rightfully belonged to me. My family remained blissfully unaware of the changes already underway, each convinced their world would continue as they envisioned. Jessica walked me to the door, her words filled with anticipation of what lay ahead for her. "Thank you for being so supportive," she said, sincerity coloring her voice. "I can't imagine doing this without you." I paused, bridging the space between us with a reply. "You're welcome, Jessica. We'll make sure everything is perfect." I left my parents' home that night, knowing that in time they'd see how fragile their assumptions had been. Soon the real plans would unfold and their illusions would give way to reality. Until then, I would continue my careful dance, keeping my intentions shrouded in secrecy. The day of the engagement party arrived with a hush of expectation in the air. I stood outside the venue watching guests arrive in their finest attire, each one greeted by the gentle rustling of leaves and the distant sound of a string quartet. They moved with the fluid grace of people sure of their place, ready to celebrate what they believed would be my sister's night. My heart beat steadily, a quiet reminder of the significance of what today would unveil. Inside, the decor was exquisite, glittering chandeliers casting soft light across elegantly set tables, every detail a whisper of the wedding day I had fought to reclaim. I moved among the guests, offering warm smiles and polite nods, my mind already several steps ahead of the unfolding scene. The orchestra's music filled the room, weaving through the low hum of conversation. It was almost time. Jessica, resplendent in a pale blue gown, was the image of blissful anticipation. As she swept into the main hall, my parents flanked her like sentinels. Their expressions were a tapestry of pride and expectation, sure that this day celebrated their preferred daughter's ascent into society. My mother caught my eye, her gaze absent of any suspicion, a silent assurance that all was as she believed it to be. I held her stare, my expression projecting nothing but calm. The murmur of voices quieted as the orchestra's tune shifted, a subtle but deliberate cue orchestrated between myself and Eleanor, the venue owner, who was now quietly observing near the entrance. My sister glanced around, a momentary flicker of curiosity crossing her face before she dismissed it, swept up in the tide of her imagined triumph. Moments later, the music softened, and Eleanor stepped forward, her presence commanding the room's attention with a quiet authority. She glanced briefly at me, a slight nod acknowledging the culmination of our efforts. As she spoke, her voice was both warm and inviting everyone to direct their attention to the true event of the evening. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us on this special day. We are honored to celebrate a union that has been long awaited. The doors to the ceremony are now open." The room paused, a collective breath held in expectation. There was a brief silence, followed by a slow turn of realization rippling through the crowd like a wave. My parents exchanged puzzled glances, their certainty beginning to crack under the weight of what was unfolding. My sister's expression faltered, confusion clouding her bright smile as she looked to our parents for reassurance. My father stepped forward, his brow furrowing as he attempted to wrap his mind around the shift in the air. "This is supposed to be an engagement party," he said, his voice carrying over the soft murmurs of the guests. "What is happening?" My turn had arrived. With a steady voice, I moved to join Eleanor, allowing a collected smile to grace my lips. "The time has come to celebrate what should have always been," I stated, my words a gentle declaration that cut through the room's uncertainty. Jessica's face was a mask of disbelief, her eyes wide as comprehension dawned. Her voice wavered, barely above a whisper. This isn't my party?" "No, it isn't," I replied, my tone free of accusation or malice. "This is my wedding day, and I would be honored if you all would join me in celebrating it." The shock settled in like a thick fog, wrapping around the room as realization washed over my parents. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes darting between me and the perfectly orchestrated setting she could no longer deny. My father's face tightened with restrained anger, his lips pressing into a thin line as he struggled to maintain control. But the guests, those who had come expecting to witness one festivity, began to shift their focus, their whispers turning into smiles of genuine pleasure as they understood the day's true purpose. The atmosphere shifted once more, the initial dissonance giving way to a harmony of renewed celebration. Jessica looked at me, her expression with disbelief, yet amid her disappointment there was an acceptance. I read it in the softening of her features, in the reluctant nod she gave as she stepped back, her eyes holding a muted apology. My parents, cornered by the truth they could no longer escape, stood there, their protestations swallowed by the inevitability of the event. As the first strains of the wedding march began to play, I turned toward the aisle and felt a profound sense of calm settle over me. The day had arrived, just as it should have, restored to its rightful path. The moment was mine, imbued with the resolve that had quietly led me here. As I stepped forward, leaving my parents grappling with their undone intentions, I held my head high, knowing that this was only the beginning. With the wedding ceremony just beginning, the air inside the venue was charged with an expectant energy. I could feel the weight of every eye on me as I made my way down the aisle, but I carried myself with a sense of purpose, knowing that this day was rightfully mine. Amidst the hushed whispers and shuffling feet, I knew there was one more piece of business to attend to. As I reached the altar, I saw Julia, my lawyer, stand quietly at the side, a reassuring presence among the guests. Together, we had prepared for this moment, anticipating the questions that would demand answers. As the ceremony paused, I turned to face my parents. My father was still standing stiffly, his face a mask of barely contained frustration. My mother held onto his arm, her eyes locking onto mine with a silent plea I had not expected. But this moment was not about pleas or personal vendettas. It was about setting things right to ensure my voice carried across the room. Mom, Dad, as per the agreement you made with the venue, the costs for today's event have been billed to you. The room went silent, a tangible stillness settling over the guests. The realization of what I had just said took a moment to register with them. My father's lips parted as if to protest, but he found himself, words failing him for once. My mother's eyes filled with a mix of disbelief and something akin to apology. She had not expected this twist, but there was no room for denial now. The agreement was on record, binding and undeniable. Julia stepped forward, producing a folder and handing it to my parents. "If you have any questions, it's all here, documented and transparent," she said in her professional tone, leaving no space for misinterpretation. My father glanced at the papers, understanding that they were indeed cornered by their own actions, trapped in the web they had spun. There was no escape from accountability now, and as much as their expressions begged for reprieve, the venue's costs were rightfully assigned to them. Turning back to the altar, I felt a sense of closure wash over me. The chapter they had tried to rewrite was finally set in proper order, not through confrontation, but through quiet action. The justice I had sought was served flawlessly and with integrity. The wedding continued amidst the gentle murmurs of approval from guests who now understood the full story. As my vows echoed through the room, I knew that this moment of resolve had given way to the joy I had planned for so long. My parents, left with their quiet reckoning, were no longer a shadow over my happiness. With the ceremony concluding, I allowed myself a smile, holding tightly to the knowledge that I had reclaimed my narrative. The day, now untainted by sabotage, would be remembered for the love and unity it represented. As I turned to face the assembled guests with my partner by my side, I felt a kind of peace settle in, a true beginning, free from the past constraints, with the quiet assurance that my voice had finally been heard.